19 years you've wondered, who is my father? And you are 100% sure you are not Mr. Bradley's father.
Not having a father there at my football games, I joined Boy Scouts. I had to go with a friend and his father. It's kind of tough, and not having a father myself to go camping with and to take to the derbies at the Boy Scouts, and kind of just had to go with the other. We're arguing, and my aunt looks at my mom and tells her, well, why don't you tell him who his father is? And I looked at my mom and I'm like, what's going on? So then I started pushing my mom into letting me go see him. And I met him when I was 13 and didn't get to see him again until I was 18.
We only dated for about a month. I remember pulling over on the side road one time to make out. I cannot even remember having sex with her, and I never knew that she was pregnant. His aunt brought him to my house and said he was my baby, but I didn't believe her because I had heard nothing from the mom, knew nothing about her being pregnant, so I just thought she was messing with me.
Judge Lauren Lake listens not with judgmental distance, but with a calm, legal precision informed by her experience in family law, her understanding of the relationship between law and justice, and her ability to guide people through traumatic disclosures. Her courtroom has become something larger than a legal forum. It is a place where long-buried feelings are finally spoken because the evidence stage in a divorce case or a paternity case requires clarity, not memory-driven narratives. The description reveals how parents, potential fathers, adult children, former partners, and extended family members arrive not only with their claims but with their pain. The man at the center of the first case grew up believing that identity is supposed to come naturally. Instead, his identity was a shifting story, altered by relatives, assumptions, and paperwork. He explains how childhood events, football games, ceremonies, milestones, were marked by a constant emptiness. This is not the emptiness of loss, but the emptiness of uncertainty. No one told him in clear legal terms who his father was. And yet all legal consequences such as child support were placed on men who either doubted their role or were incorrectly identified. Judge Lauren Lake listens carefully to ensure that the procedural mistakes of the past are articulated and understood. In this case, a mother admits that she named someone on the birth certificate without DNA testing, creating legal obligations that lasted years and resulted in incarceration when support payments were not made. This leads Judge Lake to consider an important concept from legal theory. Adverse inference in Evidence Act principles suggest that withholding truth or failing to document biological reality creates unjust burdens. She acknowledges that the concept of justice in jurisprudence differs from emotional fairness. Law requires evidence, and only science can settle biological connection when memory fails. The mother confesses that her assumptions replaced legal verification. She believed one man was the father, then later believed another. She watched the child's features evolve and shift, but instead of returning to the court to correct the legal record immediately, she allowed years of consequences to unfold. That failure is not addressed through anger in Judge Lake's courtroom, but through analysis, because this space is designed to transform confusion into verifiable truth. The presence of multiple potential fathers reveals how fragile verbal claims can be when they are not supported by courtroom procedure. One man expresses that he always doubted his involvement because he does not remember full intimacy with the mother. Another man expresses rage because he served jail time for child support he should not have owed. The son expresses quiet grief because his childhood was shaped not by a stable paternal presence, but by fragments of narrative. He explains that he always felt displaced at events where fathers stood beside sons, not because of abandonment, but because of legal uncertainty. Judge Lauren Lake uses her voice to stabilize the emotional noise. She references how even the game-changing attorney podcast and other legal discussion platforms emphasize that modern litigation must align with truth rather than assumption. The courtroom does not entertain speculation. It demands verifiable proof. She also acknowledges that family court cases, much like testimonies shared in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, require honesty, confession, and the courage to say what should have been said decades earlier. The Divorce Course podcast and similar legal commentary platforms often discuss how paternity misidentification becomes a generational wound. This description reflects that reality. When paperwork is wrong, childhood identity fractures, adult trust collapses, and relationships break before they even begin. Judge Lake does not deliver lecture-style analysis, but her questions pull truth into the open. She reminds everyone that justice is not punishment but correction. The DNA results in the case finally provide what the courtroom has lacked for more than 30 years: clarity. Science announces fatherhood, not memory. The man who doubted his paternity learns that the child is indeed his. He expresses sorrow for lost birthdays, missed family introductions, and delayed emotional bonding. His regret mirrors countless DNA test cheating stories from the show's history. But here the twist is not infidelity. It is silence. No one lied maliciously. They simply failed to insist that the truth be tested. Judge Lauren Lake confirms paternity, and with that confirmation, decades of emotional fog lift instantly. The adult son, who lived in psychological limbo, can now attach his identity to factual roots. He can pursue name change processes and resolve final administrative confusion. In the language of law, the case is settled. In the language of human restoration, the case is just beginning. The mother absorbs what science confirms. The man who paid child support illegally receives acknowledgement but not restitution due to statutory limits. The biological father feels a mix of grief and closure. The son stands relieved, not because he receives anyone's apology, but because he finally receives definition. This courtroom, televised, analyzed, discussed on legal shows and family recovery podcasts, becomes a place of resolution rather than spectacle. The relationship between law and justice has rarely been so visible. Science gives law its anchor. Law gives family its structure. Justice gives identity its foundation. Judge Lauren Lake ends the matter not with emotional fireworks but with quiet clarity. She reminds the parties that closure is not a performance. It is a legal right. The man who doubted becomes the father who knows. The son who wondered becomes the adult who understands. The mother who guessed becomes the witness to the truth she delayed. This description is not a dramatization, but a direct articulation of what happened in that courtroom. Uncertain identities resolved, legal errors confronted, emotional silence ended, and biology confirmed without spectacle. The place where truth was postponed becomes the place where truth finally prevailed. As proceedings continue under the measured authority of Judge Lauren Lake, the courtroom shifts from revelation to reconstruction. Truth has already altered the emotional landscape. Now it must redefine the legal one. After the DNA test confirmed paternity, the focus moves from identity toward accountability. Not financial accountability alone, but personal, relational, and generational. In this stage, the court is not punishing past confusion. It is reestablishing order after decades of misalignment between biological fact and legal record. Judge Lake has handled countless cases where people regret taking too long to pursue answers, and yet she approaches each situation as a singular narrative rather than a familiar pattern. She recognizes that the emotional cost of delayed truth often exceeds the cost of unpaid or misdirected child support. In this matter, the adult son is not seeking money. He is seeking placement within his own family tree. The biological father, now confirmed, realizes that the absence he did not believe he caused was real and deeply felt. His reaction is not defensive but stunned, as if clarity arrives too late to re-experience the years he missed. This moment represents the friction between the relationship between law and justice. Law corrected the record. Justice must now heal the person. Judge Lauren Lake explains implicitly through her presence that justice rarely arrives early but must arrive honestly. In jurisprudence, especially family law, the concept of justice in jurisprudence is not poetic. It is procedural. Justice means placing the correct name on the correct line, not to punish but to anchor identity. The mother, after admitting earlier assumptions, sits in recognition of how misinformation becomes legal architecture. She is not condemned by the court, but she is confronted by truth. Her role reveals how personal certainty, when undocumented, becomes a legal error that can imprison the wrong man, destabilize a child's foundation, and distort decades of family structure. The court does not seek to shame her. It only documents the consequences of assumption. The adult son, now emotionally released from doubt, describes a quiet internal shift, not dramatic relief but structural realignment. Where once he carried fragments of identity, now there is factual continuity. He spent years watching others enjoy what he could not. A consistent support system, a father's presence, a name that felt rooted. Now, after years of emptiness, identity is no longer borrowed. It belongs to him. Not because someone claimed him verbally, but because science confirmed him legally. Judge Lauren Lake pauses the emotional current long enough to place this case in a broader frame, one acknowledged in platforms like the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where attorneys challenge old legal habits and advocate for scientific verification before assigning lifelong obligations. The story unfolding here becomes a living example of those discussions. Legal responsibility must follow evidence, not assumption. The courtroom also reflects themes often addressed in the Divorce Course podcast, which dissects how broken family records, mistaken paternity, and administrative errors become emotional debts that cannot be repaid. The biological father in this case expresses that he did not deny involvement from cruelty but from uncertainty. Without information, he lived in doubt. With information, he must adjust his internal reality to match newly confirmed truth. Even though this case is not about addiction, its emotional disclosures resemble those shared in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where individuals admit what they avoided, what they misunderstood, and how truth sets a person free not only legally but spiritually. Here, truth does not punish, it cleanses. The court acknowledges another layer, legal principle concerning adverse inference in evidence act, which suggests that when evidence is not secured at the time it should have been, the consequences multiply. This case illustrates that principle more vividly than written statute ever could. The failure to seek testing in the beginning caused incarceration of a man who was not biologically connected and forced the biological father to live decades believing he was not responsible for a child who carried his genetic identity. Beyond legal theory, the emotional outcome remains central. The father, now confirmed, expresses regret, not theatrical regret, but quiet recognition that he missed his child's early years, formative milestones, and foundational bonds. It is not guilt that consumes him. It is grief for a time that cannot be rewound. The son does not demand apology. He simply desires acknowledgement. When Judge Lauren Lake confirms officially that the biological record must be corrected, she does so not to assign blame but to restore proper lineage. The name change request becomes symbolic. The son wishes not to erase his past but to align it. In many adoption stories' full episodes, individuals describe how names are more than identifiers. They are emotional coordinates. The same truth applies here. A name is not vanity. It is origin. The court's tone remains steady. The biological father agrees to assist with the clerical adjustments, not as financial obligation, but as recognition of truth. Statutes prevent retroactive repayment or compensation for wrongful child support, yet emotional justice does not require currency. It requires participation going forward. As observers of televised courtroom outcomes, audiences sometimes expect confrontation, but Judge Lake cultivates restoration over spectacle. Her judicial presence embodies fairness rather than judgment. She demonstrates that the relationship between law and justice must be active, not abstract. This case also becomes a quiet mirror of numerous DNA test cheating stories, though the cause here was not deception, but absence of verification. DNA does not humiliate, It clarifies. It dismantles narratives built by memory and constructs evidence-based identities. In divorce courts, criminal courts, and family courts alike, DNA reshapes what people believed, proving that truth changes everything, even if that truth arrives decades later. When the case concludes, the courtroom does not erupt. It settles. The adult son now possesses a truth that no argument, no assumption, and no incorrect birth certificate can overturn. The father walks away with a son he always doubted, but now knows biologically belongs to him. The mother, though emotionally weighted, carries the knowledge that assumptions cannot substitute for procedure. Judge Lauren Lake closes the file knowing this is more than a legal win. It is a reconstruction of a life narrative. She understands, as legal commentators often discuss, that procedural corrections are not emotionally neutral. Every signature, every name, every line on every document is tied to identity, belonging, and self-definition. Thus, this second portion of the description concludes not with dramatic victory but with quiet, factual closure. Law has aligned with science. Identity has aligned with evidence. The father and son, separated by decades of uncertainty, now stand connected, not through memory or denial but through verified truth. In the final stretch of this case, Judge Lauren Lake addresses not merely the parties present, but the broader implications that such proceedings represent in family jurisprudence. She understands that this courtroom, though focused on one identity dispute, serves as a reflection of countless family histories marked by silence, substitute certainty, and delayed truth. The DNA test functioned as the last and most accurate witness. Its conclusions require no memory, no interpretation, and no emotional defense. It stands as the ultimate voice in a matter where people regret taking so long to seek clarity. At this stage, the courtroom transitions from clarification into integration. The adult son has his father's identity confirmed and can now align his personal narrative with biological fact. This alignment is not just a label. It is the difference between existing in fragmented emotional uncertainty and standing in complete identity. Judge Lake's tone remains steady, signaling that while science settles the biological answer, the human heart must navigate what comes after. This posture embodies the nuanced relationship between law and justice, acknowledging that justice achieved late is still justice, but it carries residue. The biological father, now confronted with undeniable truth, finds himself looking backward across years that no longer feel ambiguous. It is not that he refused responsibility. It is that the absence of verified information left him suspended between possibility and denial. In acknowledging this, the court highlights why accuracy must always precede obligation in matters of paternity, child support, and legal identity. The evidence stage in divorce case and paternity proceedings is not a formality but the core of legal fairness. Without it, consequences are rendered without foundation. Judge Lauren Lake further recognizes that popular legal platforms such as the Game-Changing Attorney podcast and televised family court episodes all reinforce the same premise demonstrated here. Legal truth must be rooted in demonstrable fact, not personal narrative. When that root is established, justice becomes stable, not interpretive. The courtroom has witnessed this transformation. A conflicted identity becomes a documented one. The atmosphere following the verdict is quiet, not celebratory. This silence is not discomfort, it is recalibration. The father must reorient his understanding of the past. The son must reframe his childhood. The mother must accept that her memory-based decisions shaped decades of confusion. None of these acknowledgments are explosive, yet each carries profound emotional weight. They reflect the understated gravity also heard in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where individuals tell truths that were delayed, bruised, or resisted, but ultimately needed. As the clerical conversations continue, Judge Lake clarifies the boundaries of legal repair. Although the man wrongly assigned as father cannot be compensated due to statutory expiration, acknowledgement remains the human form of restitution. His suffering, both financially and emotionally, is documented, validated, and not forgotten. Legal correction arrives too late to reverse his incarceration and forced child support, but early enough to prevent further misidentification. This distinction illustrates how law cannot always restore, but it can stop continuation of harm. Meanwhile, the confirmed father begins the process of embracing identity, not as a question, but as a certainty. His cooperation in paperwork and his acceptance of name change requests honor the truth that the court has finally secured. This is not reconnection through shared memory, but reconnection through verified lineage. The outcome resembles the emotional resolution found in adoption stories' full episodes, where identification is less about past events and more about future belonging. Once again, Judge Lauren Lake proves that the concept of justice in jurisprudence is fundamentally restorative. It does not demand punishment where confusion, not malicious intent, guided decisions. It demands clarity, documentation, and dignity. None of the individuals leave with erased history. They leave with redefined history. Law cannot remove the confusion of years, but it can prevent the confusion from expanding into future generations. This case also echoes patterns commonly seen in DNA test cheating stories, though here the misidentification stemmed not from betrayal but from assumption. The lesson remains universal. Emotional certainty cannot replace scientific verification. The court formalizes this principle so that future family decisions may follow clarity rather than speculation. Truth, as echoed repeatedly in both legal commentary circles and family support communities, remains the only stable foundation. In closing, Judge Lake reminds the courtroom that truth changes everything not because it alters the past, but because it restructures the future. Identity is no longer floating, responsibility is no longer misplaced, and emotional wounds are no longer silent. Justice becomes not a dramatic declaration but a structural correction. The final documentation is prepared. The father's name will be placed correctly. The son's identity will be legally solidified. The mother leaves with understanding that procedure must always follow evidence. The court does not label her intentions as malicious, only uninformed. Her acknowledgement of assumption serves as a quiet caution to any parent who considers nomming without testing. The courtroom itself becomes a symbolic threshold. Before the DNA ruling, every person in the room carried versions of truth. After the ruling, they carry only one. The legal record now matches biological reality. The emotional narrative now matches factual confirmation, and the future now matches what science has declared. As court concludes, there is no applause, no spectacle, no heightened theatrics. There is simply resolution. A man who lived decades without paternal clarity now stands with a confirmed lineage. A father who lived with doubt now lives with documented identity. A mother who lived with assumption now lives with verification. Judge Lauren Lake closes her docket, aware that her role extends beyond legal pronouncement. She has shepherded a family through reconstruction, restoring the connection between name and origin, between law and truth, between human need and judicial remedy. What was once uncertain is now defined. What was once fractured now returns to structural coherence. This case is no longer about confusion. It is about correction. Its conclusion reinforces not only the authority of DNA in family law, but the deeper principle that justice must match reality, not memory. The courtroom clears, identity stands, and truth remains, permanent, undeniable, and finally complete.